Welcome back to the Best of Health podcast. My goal is simple. Each episode, I hope to provide you with insightful conversations with a varied scope of healthcare professionals, clinicians, researchers, functional medicine practitioners, and industry leaders to open up the dialogue to inspire you, the listener, to consider that declining health as we age is not a given, and that with the right information, many chronic diseases are indeed preventable. I hope to engage and inspire everyone to achieve the very best of health. Welcome back to the Best of Health podcast. Today I am absolutely thrilled to have with me Emma Beswick, who is a dear friend and colleague, and she is the director of one of the world's leading nutrigenomics companies. And if that doesn't mean anything to you, or you don't understand what nutrigenomics is, then sit tight, because Emma's going to explain what that means and how understanding our nutrigenomics can be such a powerful tool in addressing and supporting our health and longevity. So without further ado, and the name of the company, which I don't think I did mention, is that Emma's company is LifeCode GX. Let's get started and welcome Emma.
Oh, thank you, Tanya. Such kind words. Thank you so much. I'm really delighted to be chatting to you, as always.
Well, it's just an absolute pleasure, really is. So actually, for the listeners, Emma and I studied together many years ago. We studied naturopathic nutrition, and so Emma is a qualified nutritional therapist, and she then went on to specialize in the world of nutrigenomics, and it is an area that I use so much and find it so powerful within my clinical practice. And so, Emma, could you explain to our listeners in lay terms what actually nutrigenomics is, and also maybe some people I know do get a bit frightened about some of the information that might be uncovered. So you could speak to that.
Absolutely, I can try. Nutrigenomics is a branch of genomics, and that's all about DNA and genetic testing. So that's the big subject, and the nutrigenomics aspect means that we only look at things that we can adjust by nutrition and lifestyle environmental changes. So we're not looking at any genetics that are determinate that will mean you definitely are going to get a certain condition or illness. It's things that can alter the risk or the likelihood, but the other tools within our grasp, within our kit, like our food, like exercise, like sleep, etc., can all positively interact with our genetics and create a healthy situation rather than an unhealthy one. And so we're looking at really small changes in our DNA, one letter changes that are called SNPs. So single nucleotide polymorphisms, but we'll just call them SNPs.
Great.
From now on. And so these small changes can basically alter how we react to certain nutrients or how we process certain nutrients. So vitamin D is a really nice example, I think.
Yes, it is. So could you maybe explain that, what that means?
Yeah, so vitamin D, we all need vitamin D, and it's not, in some ways, it's not an essential nutrient because we make our own. So we need sunlight on our skin to manufacture our own vitamin D. Where the genetics comes in is that different changes in the genetic code can alter the way we make that vitamin D. So the sun is hitting the skin and chemical reactions start to happen, and that's where the genes start to interact. And so some people can make it more efficiently, other people can transport that vitamin D more or less efficiently, depending on a different transporter gene. But Tanya gave me the idea of the taxi analogy, which I now use all the time.
Yeah.
But there is a vitamin D taxi gene that carries the vitamin D from your skin to your organs to the places in the body where it needs to do its job. And if you've got a snip on the taxi, it's as if the taxi can't carry as many people. So it's like, if you got a people carrier or if you got a moped for your vitamin D.
Perfect.
Yeah. And if you're the moped, then maybe you need more vitamin D coming in, and that moped to be constantly working. Whereas if you're the people carrier, you might be able to get away with a big load of vitamin D once in a while, and you can retain that level. And
That's
the beauty
brilliant.
of knowing this, yes, that taxi, honestly, Tanya, that taxi analogy,
You use that, do you? I should coin that one.
over and over. Yeah.
So for those of you listening, really helps you to understand. So we vitamin D has been in the spotlight, if you like, so much this year because of COVID, and this really helps to explain why many people, when they have their vitamin D tested, it is continually low, or it's just bumping along the bottom of the normal range, is because what is measured in blood does not account for what's going on inside, if you like, in terms of what Emma is talking about, is your genetic makeup, so once you've had these tests done, you never run them again, because this is your hard drive. It's not going to change. But where we see the nuances, so as Emma talked about with vitamin D, if you have a slight variant on the taxi and you've got only a moped transporting your vitamin D rather than a people carrier, then you know that you're always going to be you have a greater need for vitamin D, and to be able to keep that level in the blood at the most optimal range.
Yeah. And I think some people have an awareness of different nutrients, and for some maybe health reason in the past, they might have discovered that they have a naturally low this or that, whether it's D, whether it's one of the B vitamins, for example, like B12.
Yeah.
But other people are just kind of going through life, maybe not feeling ill, but maybe not feeling optimally well, and having no idea that it's something that could be quite simple to improve. So sometimes you can use the testing to work out why someone isn't feeling well. Mm-hmm. And other times it could be done almost as a scan, almost like a scan.
Like a health check.
Okay, yeah, let's look through all the essential nutrients, the genes that impact those, and which ones stand out as needing or potentially benefiting from more direct support for that individual. Sometimes that really resonates with people. As soon as they get the test result, it's kind of like they always thought they knew or had an idea that aspect was something that was letting the side down. And for other people, it's just a total surprise, and they never would have thought of it. So in fact, I had a really, really perfect experience like that really early on in the company, where we were doing training for practitioners. Mm-hmm. And one of the practitioners, we were talking about histamine. So moving on from vitamins, but histamine is so topical at the moment as a problematic thing.
Compound.
So, yeah. So people get allergic type symptoms like hay fever or itching or migraines. Mm-hmm. Those are typically symptoms of excess histamine, and it's very, very common to have this. And we were discussing genes that impact histamine, and a practitioner sat there and she said, I have had migraines for 5 years, and I'm a practitioner, and I thought that I'd tried everything, but partly when you're trying to look after yourself, you can't often you don't see the obvious.
Absolutely.
But she was like, this is it. After all this time, it's the histamine, and I've only just realised that it, you know, I'm not doing anything differently in terms of my lifestyle. I'm not doing anything particularly unhealthy.
Yeah.
But it's just that for her, actually things that we do think of as being healthy, like avocado, like citrus fruit, kiwi fruit, happen to be high in histamine. And so it's very easy for people to be eating those things, doing the right thing, but then experiencing these allergy type symptoms and having headaches and things like that. And the genetic test can pinpoint this is why. For these people, avocado maybe is not a healthy thing.
Yeah, superfood for them. So I
Yeah.
can literally feel people sitting up and sort of sitting on the edge of their seat with that previous dialogue and histamine, and that's a nice segue into a number of topics. So the the genetic side of this involves a process of clearing histamine, actually, involves a process that we call methylation. And this is a big area that Emma's genetic company, LicoGX, can help to assess where the slight variants are and whether, and uh, maybe Emma, this would be an example for you to, an opportunity more for you to explain a little bit about what methylation is and how that correlates to histamine. Would that be okay?
Yeah, I can give it a go. So, methylation is a big word that most people haven't heard of. And so, in the nutrition world, in practitioner world, most people have, but it's not the kind of word you kind of talk about to your friends on a Friday night,
No.
is it?
Well, maybe you and I might, but
Yeah, we might do. Yeah. So, but from a health perspective, it is a really big thing. It basically is a very simple biochemical reaction. So it's just chemistry in the body that involves adding a methyl group to one substance. And what that does is it methylates that substance. And by methylating a substance, so just adding this chemical, which is a carbon and 3 hydrogens, it usually deactivates the recipient substance. And so histamine is an example of that.
brilliant.
So histamine gets this molecule glued to it, and it completely changes the behaviour of the histamine, and it means that it's no longer reactive in the body, and it doesn't create all these irritating kind of effects. So you need the methyl. You need this chemical to. It's almost like it's the fairy dust that is just kind of making everything nice and sparkly rather than all horrible and bad. So we get the methyl group from B vitamins, zinc and magnesium, and we make it ourselves. So if you eat the foods that have those vitamins in, and you have not got too many SNPs that impact the journey of those vitamins to their destination, then you might make lots and lots of these methyl groups, and that might be perfectly adequate to manage your histamine, for example. But like we said with vitamin D, there are lots of things that can disrupt the journey of the B vitamins to their destination and the availability to make the methyl. And it's the same principle. So a SNP on a gene called MTHFR.
Oh, she said it.
It's the big
So this
bad.
is a rabbit hole which we're not going to go down, but yes, but go on.
I thought I'd get it over with.
Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, MTHFR is a gene that a lot of people will have heard of, and for bad reasons usually. So it's got a lot of negative press. What MTHFR does, its job, is to create active or methylfolate. So the food that you eat, some of it is already active, but other parts of that folate have to have different molecules attached to them, and it ultimately become methylated. And MTHFR methylates the folate. So it's a single step, and if you have a SNP on MTHFR, that can mean that it doesn't work as well. So your methyl supply can be impacted by that particular SNP. But the important thing is, because it's nutrigenomics, you can fix it. So you can compensate for that SNP quite easily, actually.
And it's perfect. And it's about understanding. So the Life Code GX reports are, as a practitioner, they are, as a layperson, you will get them, but your practitioner will guide you through interpreting it, because it is genetic code, but they are set out in a really beautiful, they're color coded, and your practitioner will be able to explain these processes. But everything that Emma has just spoken to, imagine this, you've got sort of these a Ferris wheel that is continually spinning, and each seat of that Ferris wheel is like a double seat, and that double seat, they need to be full with methyl donors, because every time it turns, it's creating these methyl donors, which are used to deactivate histamine, but they're used to deactivate hormones, to make neurotransmitters, to help you detoxify, to replicate DNA. So we want your Ferris wheel to be spinning, and we want the seats to be full, and all of these components can be supported through the right diet and lifestyle. And in no means is it sort of a pill for an ill. It is not a supplement for every single SNP. That is not the way that we would use this information.
No, I feel really strongly about that, actually. And I think everyone kind of intuitively wants an easy solution. And so people often get their genetic results, and their first question is, do I need X supplement? And it's like, no, you don't need a supplement. Usually it's about identifying the weak points in the process and just supporting them. And with food, so we're all of the food first approach, so can't always be completely supported with food, but that should be our first consideration. So for example, when you eat folate foods, so folate is vitamin B9, and folate, just think foliage, so think leafy green. Yeah, when you eat the leafy green foods, actually that food often includes other B vitamins as well. So nature has packaged the food in a way that the components all complement each other, and your body needs all of them. It needs that package. It doesn't just need one thing in isolation. And so by getting it in that form, your body can choose what it needs when it needs it, as long as the supply is there. There are some exceptions when people maybe have become very depleted in a certain nutrient, and maybe they don't eat the type of food that is rich in that nutrient, and maybe there's an ethical reason for that. Or maybe their gut health means that at that point in time they're not able to absorb those nutrients as well. But there is always a solution, and it can be a combination of foods, supplements, but other lifestyle things as well, like getting out in sunlight is one really, really nice way of doing it. So yeah, we want all these nutrients. They are like the components. It's like Lego almost.
Yes.
To build the things that your body needs to do that. And there might be increased demand for the methyl groups as well. So one example is stress, that Tanya and I have talked about quite a lot, on a personal level as well as a professional one. So when we're stressed and our body goes into a fight or flight mode, we make adrenaline, and in making adrenaline, it uses up a lot of the methyl groups. So adrenaline is a methylated substance. We've used them up to make the adrenaline. And ironically, almost, to then deactivate the adrenaline also needs a methyl group.
Yes, of course.
So it's kind of like you've used it all at making it, or you're just using it up more and more and more the longer and the more stressed you are. But that can mean that you can't break it down and come down from that stress as easily. So firstly, stress is very depleting in terms of our resources because it's using up this really valuable, universally beneficial molecule. And then secondly, how do you come down from it and use the adrenaline and then lose the adrenaline so that it's not keeping you in this really wired situation? But if you are in that situation, then you're potentially using up that supply so that it can't be used to deactivate the histamine, and it can't be used to deactivate the other hormones either. So you're potentially creating other problems elsewhere in your health.
Absolutely. And that's very topical. Emma and I are, we're midway through delivering a course for practitioners, and it is all on the what's called the HPA axis and women's health. And what Emma has just has spoken about is if we're trawling through on in this case our micronutrients that are needed to drive this particular process that we're talking about of methylation, but numerous other processes, then our health becomes impacted. So it means that we don't have enough resources to deliver to our immune system to drive that, or our thyroid health, or it could be a whole number of different components, and that's how it's so interconnected. And stress it's not just mental and emotional. It is if you've got an infection, if there is any form of inflammatory process from insulin resistance or type 2 diabetes, or if there is a disruption in circadian rhythm, all of this is stress to the master controller. So it's...
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of people who have an illness, if it's a complex or chronic illness, they can often work backwards and identify something that happened to them that almost triggered their illness. And yeah, as you say, it's many different types of stressors could be the trigger to knocking this delicately balanced system out of balance.
Yeah.
And that applies to all over the body, doesn't it? It's all over the place. Your body is brilliant at recovering itself.
Yeah.
If you give it the resources to work.
If you give it the resources, and then if not, then our reserves literally become depleted and it can't function. So it's having to reprioritize. And so understanding where our genetic variants are, it's like I've quite often described it to my clients, which might be helpful for the listener, is that we're looking at the stage show of your life. So all of the whole cast is out on the stage, and what we're looking at with your slight variants are we're shining a spotlight on the individuals when the chips are down. Where are the weakest links? And sadly, that's what ill health essentially is it will pick out the weak link in the chain. So it's shining a spotlight on the stage on where those variants are. So understanding that and supporting them through diet and lifestyle interventions is such a powerful tool.
Yeah, I think that is totally my belief as well, that it's where are your weak links? Where are the chips in the paintwork?
Yeah.
And how do you kind of cover them up? You know, people come around the house, just cover up the blemishes, not with a sticking plaster, but really shore them up from the beginning, from the bottom up.
Yeah.
Give them that stability, give them that extra nurture, and make sure that they're not going to be the failure points, or they're not going to contribute to the kind of the failure when the system is under stress, and we're all under different stresses the whole
Absolutely,
time.
that's life.
Yeah, absolutely.
So a lot of
And you
them.
can,
Sorry, Emma, carry on.
I was just going to say, it's like some people can use that information in a proactive way, and there might be a family history of a certain, type of illness, like
Mhm.
cardiovascular disease in one family, or an autoimmune set of conditions in another, and everyone in the family has seen this happen, um, but they've never really got to the root of the problem. And the genetics is about as far to the root as you can go.
Yes.
It's really working from the bottom up. And so if you have that information and you can see this is the gene or the selection of genes that have been passed through the family, but again, because it's nutrigenomics, it's not fate. It doesn't have to happen. It doesn't have to turn out that way. So you can be proactive in addressing it, or you might actually have been ill or are ill, and you want to understand what the driver is.
Yeah,
And being bombarded with every single wellness message that is out there is stressful in itself,
it really is.
isn't it?
It really is. Absolutely. So a great starting point for is your panel call, which is called the nutrient core, which assesses, as the name might suggest, some of these key nutrients. So B vitamins. It also looks at beautifully. It looks at vitamin A and the ability to be able to convert beta carotene into retinol, which is the most active form, which is in partnership with vitamin D, which is also on the report, is so important for immune function and gut health. Vitamin K, your clock genes, which I think is fascinating around circadian rhythm. And then you have another fantastic panel, which I use so much with women, which is looking at estrogen metabolism, which means the ability to how are we genetically set up to make estrogen and our other steroid hormones like testosterone and progesterone, and how do we receive them, and then how do we clear them. So Emma, in terms of, are there particular, I know in my clinic what I would do, but are there particular conditions that you see that as it pertains to women's health, that how you've seen that really help illuminate how a practitioner will guide them to a different form of support with your women's health report?
Yeah, so if you just, I think the estrogen is a really, really nice way of looking at it. Your genes are fixed, your code is fixed in terms of what that code looks like, and that's part of the picture. But we all know that our hormones fluctuate on a cyclical basis or on a life stage basis, as well. So that proves really that the genetics are just part of this picture, because that natural fluctuation is there. But a lot of women experience at some point in their lives high estrogen, and this is partly because our environment has changed in the last century. There is so much more estrogen in our environment, in terms of in plastic packaging and furniture coverings and lots of things like that. So we've got more estrogen kind of piling into the system from multiple sources, and we can look at the genes and see if someone has symptoms of high estrogen, which again, there's a diverse range of symptoms. So that could be headaches again, it could be menstrual migraines, it could be pain, it could be PMT, it could be mood related, or if you're very unlucky, all of those things. So people have these symptoms, they know that it's linked to their hormones, but they don't know whether they can do anything about it. And high estrogen could be due to making more. It could be due to, as you say, how do you receive that estrogen? So some people are more sensitive to the estrogen, and the same amount of estrogen for two different people might actually be received and responded to in a different way.
Mm-hmm.
So if you understand the radar part of the picture, how sensitive is that radar? Is it on low receipt, or is it able to pick up every tiny signal that is coming from that estrogen, which may not be a good thing in that case, because it might mean that you get symptoms of estrogen excess, even if your estrogen isn't that excessive. And then it's about the removal. So methylation comes into this.
Yeah.
Methylation deactivates the estrogen. And then finally, the estrogen needs to be detoxified, which sounds a bit dramatic, calling estrogen a toxin, but it can behave like a toxin in your body if it isn't efficiently removed once it's done its job. So we want that whole process to be really nicely balanced. And if your estrogen is high, it could be any part of that process that is compromised. And by looking at the genes, you can identify really, really quickly, literally by looking at one piece of paper, where those pinch points are. So we're trying to translate something that starts off as being quite complicated into something that is really, really usable and understandable. And the practitioner will understand it, but also from the perspective of you, the individual who owns these genes, you can understand why your practitioner is making the recommendations that they're making. And then ultimately, when you're the person making the food choices in the supermarket, you're going to be more inclined to buy that broccoli.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
You really are.
Yes.
Because ultimately, that is what is going to change your health in the long term. In the short term, in the long term, is just understanding for yourself why you're doing things, and it doesn't. You don't have to go through that whole process every time you stood in front of the broccoli. It's this gene, da da da. But you know that from then on, and it allows you to develop those helpful behaviours that are right for you. They might not be right for your friend.
Absolutely.
But they're right for you.
Yes.
And we all know that old adage that, this diet works brilliantly for this person, but it didn't work for the next person. And that goes across the board with food.
It really does. And women, and I'm not being sexist here at all, but women's hormones, the dance of women's hormones is just so much more complicated. And I mean, Emma and I teach this, so we know that it is much more complicated. And so at different life stages for women, there are certain hormones that are unopposed. So for example, in perimenopause and the early stages of perimenopause, which can last 3 or 4 years, there is much more of estrogen that is spiking and that is more predominant than progesterone. And so we having this understanding of where our genetic variants are or our vulnerabilities are, especially at certain life stages where hormones are whipped away from us very cruelly by Mother Nature, that we can make the right adaptations so that the environment is more welcoming to this recalibration of our years so we can transition more smoothly. And I choose those words very specifically because I see that, and I know that you do, in terms of that there is a way of navigating these different life stages in a much more lapping at the shore rather than it being turbulent waters, if we are respectful of sort of where our vulnerabilities are and understand that.
I totally agree. And a lot of our terminology talks about balance. We're trying to exactly that. We don't want too much of a storm. We want a nice sunny day at the beach and the waves lapping at the shore.
Oh, that would be
Um,
nice.
we want the variation because we want to feel and sense and experience different things, but we don't want an absolute storm of a time, because that's when it feels awful, and that's when our biology and our brilliant design that is intended to rebalance and recalibrate. We want to help it do that. We don't want to give it the biggest challenge ever. We don't want the Big Dipper all the
No.
time.
Yeah.
So it can do that for us if we give it the right support at the right time.
Yeah.
And it's about, again, if you know that there is a certain potential for something to genetically push something strongly in one direction, you can accommodate that, you can counteract it. And I think the people with the worst symptoms in transitional stages of life, often, and it's not just then actually, even in cycling stages of a woman's life,
Absolutely.
the choppier it is, the worse those symptoms are going to be. A lot of symptoms can relate to withdrawal of things or having too much of things, and it's almost as if another analogy that I like to use is a seesaw, and like, you want the seesaw to be reasonably balanced. You don't want someone to come along and just whack one end down and the other person flies off the other end.
Yeah.
You want to give the system a chance. Give yourself a chance to keep things under control rather than getting really, really wacky out of control. But we have the tools, and this is a great time to be working in health and having these sources of information at our disposal.
Absolutely. And I think that's a really fantastic place to sort of to wrap this up in terms of the approach that Life Code GX has, and that the ethics that underpin this sits really completely centrally to an integrative sort of functional sort of lifestyle approach. And I think the way that we are looking at health now is that we know that sort of one pill, a hormone replacement, whether that's for a thyroid, whether that's for estrogen, whether that's for progesterone, which it may well be needed, but that one intervention can only work within the environment to which it's being put. And this is sort of why our kit bag is so much broader and has so much more depth, because we can, to use your own words, manipulate to our advantage where the vulnerabilities are, and we have far more tools in our kit bag than sort of one replacement therapy.
Absolutely. And it's just another example of one size does not fit all. And it's about informed choice about these things and personalisation. And as you say, it can look complicated, and that's the reason we work with practitioners. Is you can do some of this on your own. You can understand probably a nutrient core report to some extent, but you will get so much more from it working with someone who understands the context and is experienced in putting all those different pieces of information together.
Oh. So you can find out more about Life Code GX by we'll put their details in the show notes, and you can, and on their website they do list practitioners that are familiar with their reports and work with them. So if you're a client, then absolutely that's the way to go. If you're a practitioner, then sign up and register with Life Code GX, and they have a support for practitioners. And it has been an absolute pleasure. There is so much more to talk about, and we will get you back in series 2. But for now, it has been just an absolute joy, as always, to talk to you and to geek out with
We can't help
hopefully,
ourselves.
yeah, we can't help ourselves. So thank you for enlightening us and hopefully distilling any slight fears that people have about about understanding this information. Information is power, and this is part of the information that we can get. Thank you, Emma. See you
Thank
soon.
you, Tanya. See you soon.